teammates. Welcome to the Live Well podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jen Collins.
And I'm Seth Christopher. Welcome to the Well.
Welcome, everybody. It is another episode of the Well. Seth, we are officially in April.
It's April. You know what that means.
April Fool's Day?
Well, there's that. I was thinking more along the lines like April showers, and then we're going to kind of talk about money. So I was going to try to bring it together, but clearly that didn't work.
It's all good. It is. There's been quite a few April showers, but we have a whole lot. You mentioned money and talking about finances. We have a ton of information to get into. I suggest we dive right in.
I do too. Yeah, super important topic, all jokes aside. We got a lot of information lined up for you teammates to talk about. In general, talking about budget overview, and then we've got a great guest. So let's go ahead and dive in.
I bet you have some fast facts for us.
I do. Fast fact. Recent research by Northwestern Mutual found that 87% of Americans surveyed agree that nothing makes them happier or more confident than feeling like they have their finances under control and in order. Think about that. Almost 9 in 10 people say having their finances together brings an unparalleled happiness. Fast fact. In that same body of research from Northwestern Mutual, they found that only 68% of Americans who were surveyed feel happy about their current situation at least sometimes. But most of those that were surveyed consistently experience negative emotions like anxiety, insecurity, fear, and depression. In fact, money was listed as the most dominant source of stress in their lives. And that stressor was much higher than other things we think about in our daily life, like personal relationships and work. So if we look at this together, Jen, think about it. What we're saying is that having our finances under control makes us happy. But a lot of us don't have our finances under control, so we're constantly trying to make ourselves happy, but money turns out to be this huge stressor in our lives.
I was going to say you're talking about two opposite ends of the spectrum with the same topic. I find that to be pretty interesting and maybe something that we may not be aware of. We're searching to make ourselves less stressed and doing things. If we're not focusing on the finances, that might be a big miss.
Yeah, and I also say that we constantly know money is a dominant source of stress in a lot of our personal lives, but we don't talk about it a whole lot. We typically talk about personal relationships, work, stressors of dealing with things in the community, which are all very important. But, in this particular survey, people are identifying that money and trying to manage their money is a most dominant source of stress in their lives. And if we can somehow find a tool or find a way to get them under control and help ourselves better manage our flow, potentially we have the ability to create an unparalleled sense of happiness when it comes to our finances.
It's interesting. Can you imagine if water cooler talk turned out to be around about finances and not just what your kid did for activity the night before? Like that's sort of like, that would be groundbreaking, wouldn't it, if we were able to discuss it? Because I'm sure everybody is on different spectrums, but have different tools and techniques that could assist. It's just not something we talk about.
It's a bit taboo, and it's a bit of a loaded conversation for a lot of different reasons because it has such a different meaning. That being managing finances, having finances in general have such a different connection in everyone's life. But at the end of the day, it can either serve to benefit you, having some sense of control and order, or it can serve to create this huge negative emotion. So I'm glad we're talking about today's topic, controlling your money, budgeting your money, because it's one way to help facilitate that level of financial well-being.
And our guest today is going to really break through some of the stereotypes and misconceptions about building a budget and working with your finances. And she's going to provide some really great resources. I can't wait to get to her.
You know what I can't wait for? You said misconceptions. I am sure you are ready to bust some myths.
I am. I have some fun myth busters for us. Myth number 1, setting up a budget is complicated. Creating a budget can actually be pretty simple. Basically, it's nothing more than a list of money coming in and the money that's going out. Making a budget is personal to everyone. So make sure you choose a method that works best for you. You can use an Excel spreadsheet, you can use a budgeting app, or good old-fashioned pen and paper. For my next myth, Seth, I actually have two myths in one, and they kind of go together. So myth number 2 is you have to be good with numbers, and then myth number 3 is budgeting takes too much time. So if you can add 1 and 1 and get 2, you can manage a budget. Start with your income and expenses and add them up separately. This will give you your total income and your total expenses. Then subtract your total expenses from your total income. If you end up with a negative number, you know you need to start cutting down and kind of managing those expenses a little differently. If you come up with a positive number, good job, you're on the right track. As far as time, initially when you're setting up your budget for the first time, it can take a little bit. It might take a half hour, an hour, it may take a couple of days to get everything put together. But once you have it down and you're just going through it week to week, day to day, it can take just a short time. But keep in mind, knowledge is power. You can't control what you don't know.
Such a great point. You can't control what you don't know. And if you've never sat down or you've only tried one way to budget and you haven't found it to be successful, you're right. I mean, there are a lot of different ways. I mean, there are apps, there's a spreadsheet, there's pen and paper, there's an envelope system. The reason these systems exist is because there's a lot of ways to get to the same result. It doesn't work for every person to do it the same way. And sometimes the time investment comes from an individual sitting down and trying to figure out, one, what's the process that works best for me? And then you have to go through trial and error to figure it out. Or if you're lucky, boom, Excel spreadsheets work great. Here we go. Then you become a little bit more habitual in the way that you manage and you monitor and you work towards your goals and help to create that security.
Sometimes it can be intimidating to even get started. I'm a good old-fashioned pen and paper girl. I like to just write it down and look at it visually. But it is very personal, and I like how you talked about trial and error. If you're trying something and if it's not working, if it's too complicated when you try to get in, if a spreadsheet's too much, don't do it that way. Find another way.
Great. I think this is an awesome time to bring on our guest for today, Cynthia Patterson. What do you think?
Yes, let's let the expert talk.
Right. Cyndi is a certified financial education instructor and holds the Certified Employee Benefits Specialist designation. Prior to joining Atrium, she spent many years developing and presenting financial wellness programs for retirement plans all over the United States. Here at Atrium, Cyndi is a senior HR consultant who works with Atrium's retirement plans. Cyndi, welcome to The Well.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here to talk about something that's usually not much fun, how to take control of your finances. But I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to come and spread some tips and techniques that I've found over the years have worked really well for a lot of folks.
I can't wait to have this conversation because, as Seth and I have discussed, it's a little intimidating to talk about finances. It sounds dry on the surface, but it's so important that we take control of our budget and our finances. But I think a lot of people just kind of live one day to the next and don't really think about the future. So I'm excited to see how you're going to change that perspective for us.
Exactly. And I know it seems overwhelming, but it's like anything. If you break it down into small parts and kind of just take it one step at a time, you'd be surprised at how much progress you can make.
It's definitely intimidating. Cynthia, you've been doing this for quite some time, and you talked about breaking it down into small parts. For teammates that are really trying to get control of just making a budget, what are some of the best ways for them to approach making a budget?
Well, the first thing to do is to think about what you own and what you owe. So obviously we want to own more than we owe, but there are different points throughout our life where that's just not going to happen. You know, when you're young and you're starting out and you're starting your job and having a family, finding a safe place for your family to live, that's just not likely. There's going to be some debt. But as you get older and eventually closer to thinking about retirement, it really starts to matter more, and you want to get to the point where you own more than you owe. So what you want to do is set aside, I don't know, like 15, 20 minutes. This doesn't have to be a chore. It doesn't have to be something that takes all Sunday afternoon. Just a few minutes, and think about, if I had to put my money on some cash right this minute, how much could I come up with? How much could I go to the ATM and take out? How much could I truly get my hands on? And then compare that to the things that you owe. So, for example, your housing expenses. Those are pretty fixed expenses. We usually know how much our rent or mortgage is each month. Also, things like utilities. They may vary from winter to spring, but in general, they're pretty close, and we have an idea about what that is. Those things really don't change. Again, those are called our fixed expenses. But we all have things that vary, so our variable expenses, and those are things that we really can control. That's like eating out, or clothing, or vacations, those sorts of things. You may also have some debt, some credit cards, some personal loans that you owe. You want to go ahead and write those down. And nowadays, because we do everything online, it's easy to forget what your interest rate is. So go ahead and log into your accounts and find it and write it down. List them in order of the highest interest rate to the lowest. That way you can really see where your extra money is going, and if you need to make a plan to start paying something down, you'll know what to target first.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot there, Cynthia. I mean, it sounds like the first step you described is really getting an inventory, and you put it in two really nice categories of, what are your fixed expenses, and then understanding, what are your variable expenses. Right. And then I love the phrase, your goal should be to own more than you owe. Right. And the realistic approach is, when you come out of college, or when you come out of high school, or whenever you making your first steps in your career, it's not always going to be the fact that you're coming in with positive equity. You probably have spent a lot of capital to get to where you are, and it's you got to have perspective. So I love that you use that phrase.
Exactly. And if you find out, that you do owe more than you own, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like you said, there are times in life where that is the case. We just don't want to stay that way forever. One thing that I recommend is writing down what you spend. And again, you don't want this to be a chore. So I say, find a notebook, a blank piece of paper. For me, I put it on the passenger side of my car, because I used to travel for work before I came to Atrium. And every time that I would pull over or go through a drive-through or spend money on the fly, I would write it down. And at the end of the month, I was mortified when I saw how much money I was spending eating out. It's those little $5 and $10 debit card swipes that add up, and you don't even realize how much money you're spending on things that you don't need. So I say do that. If you're married and have a family, then a general picture of where are the $10 and $20 going for the kids. You might have a harder time getting your spouse on board, but once they see you having success, they'll be more likely to do it too.
That's a really good practice. Putting it on paper. I've heard some people put it in an Excel spreadsheet, but you're right, because oftentimes $3 a day you don't think about, but if $3 times 365, I mean, that's probably enough to cover your rent or mortgage a couple times extra.
Yes, I'm embarrassed to tell you how much I was spending eating out, but it was plenty. I could have done way better things with.
So we talk a little bit about the best approaches for making a budget, or really just kind of getting things on paper and then creating a tracking system that helps you understand where these small purchases might be going. But you also talked about debt, and debt comes in a lot of different ways. I mean, we're fortunate here in the United States that we can help build businesses, we can help support ourselves, but sometimes that means that you are taking on a bit of a risk with debt. Consumer debt, you mentioned personal loans, school loans.
Right.
Is all debt good, bad? Is it all bad?
No, definitely not, because it's very hard for folks to buy a house with cash, right? We all have to take a mortgage. It's usually not likely that we're going to just pay cash for a car. So if you have to finance a car, that's considered good debt because it usually gets you to work or to school, to places that help you advance yourself. Just like student loans, you mentioned that, Seth. So many folks take student loans nowadays, but that is something that is an investment in your future, so not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes folks may have an idea for a small business they want to do on the side, and that takes some, investment in that to get that going. That's not necessarily a bad thing either. What you want to remember, though, is that if you're going into debt for something that doesn't appreciate in value or generate income for you, it's not a good idea. So, for example, I can go into my closet and look at my shoes, and yeah, they make me really happy, but that's not a good use of my debt. I don't want to put stuff like that on my credit card. So, if there's something that you think you want, there's all kinds of ways to approach that. And I've known people who've gone so far as to put their credit cards in a Ziploc bag full of water and freeze them so they can't get them out and use them. But,
Wow.
yeah.
Talk about freezing your accounts.
Exactly. But you could also just say, you know what, I'm going to think about this for 36 hours if it's a big purchase. Or go online, put it in your shopping cart, log back in on Friday, and make sure you still want it. Just try to get out of the habit of letting your money control you, and put it the other way around so that you're making good decisions and not just buying things in the heat of the moment.
And that's, I guess it's easy to say, but it's harder to do, especially in the environment that we are. We're one click, or in some apps cases, we're one swipe away from a quick purchase.
Yeah.
And if we've got our credit card attached, whether we think we're getting our value back, it can be maybe not misleading, but we can mislead ourselves in a way.
Yes, exactly. And you mentioned the key is having your credit card attached. A lot of financial advisors will advise you not to do that. So don't save your credit card information on any kind of site. That way, if you're lying in bed at night and you're surfing and you see something you want to buy, you can't just click it from bed. You have to get up, go get your wallet, put the information in, and we're less likely to do that. So little tricks that'll keep yourself from just, making bad decisions. We all have to kind of use that to our favor.
I love the suggestion of waiting 36 hours. I am an individual who has instant buyer's remorse. So if I'm spending, and it could be a small amount of money, but any amount, if it's something that is not a necessary need, I get real anxious about it, and I have to pause and think. But it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is knowledge is power. So
Yes.
Having a visual idea of what money's coming in, what money is going out, and constantly being aware of where you are within the financial budget. And that can be obviously helpful, but that can also be really intimidating. And that takes an extra level of maturity, I would think, and discipline.
Yes. And you know what I always tell people is have grace with yourself. The thing is, when we grow up and we're taught not to talk about money or politics or religion, and that can really be a disservice, because then all of us learn the hard way and we don't talk to each other about it. Whereas we really should be sharing these tips and techniques so that our friends don't get into trouble. I always tell people, you have to remember the average household in the United States owes over $16,000 in credit card debt. So that means a lot of people owe more. And, if you find yourself in that situation, don't beat yourself up. Just make a plan to get it down. I remember when I was a freshman in college, I remember walking to class and having people on the sidewalk giving out credit card applications. Like, oh, here, have a T-shirt, get a credit card. You know, we've all been tempted. So it's, you know, nothing to be ashamed of, just something that we can all agree to do better on.
What a wonderful perspective that we sometimes don't talk about finances enough, or best practices of finances with people in our circle. And it doesn't always mean, you know, how much money you're making, but talking about some of the practices. I often look at sort of high schools or middle schools and think, hey, why aren't these schools, and there probably are some out there, but why aren't they like honing in on teaching these financial skills and tips for these young students to really understand the importance of managing it, so when they get to college and they get out of college, they've got at least a concept of how their decisions can make bigger impacts down the road.
I know, it's a real shame that we don't do better with our young people.
Well, we could spend all day talking about that, but you're blowing minds here. So we talked a little bit about good debt, bad debt, budgeting. How do you know if you have too much debt? Is there sort of a threshold we should be looking for?
Yeah, so there is, and this is going to sound like math, but don't tune me out because it's not hard. So what you want to do is you want to add up your monthly debt payments. Now, when I say this, I tell people to subtract out your housing, because we all know, especially if you live in the Charlotte area, housing is expensive, and it's a priority for all of us to have a safe and secure place for our family to live. So, you know, I say subtract that part out. We're really focusing on that variable, the variable expenses, the things that we can control a little bit more. So write that down, the amount of debt that you have in a month. Then divide that by your monthly take-home pay. So go back to your pay slips, look at see how much your take-home was for the month. You're going to divide that, and you're going to take that answer and multiply it by 100. That gives you what's called your debt-to-income ratio, and that's what any lenders look at whenever you apply for credit, or mortgage, a car, anything like that. So you always want to know where you stand with your debt-to-income ratio. So again, that's your total monthly debt payments minus your housing, divided by your take-home pay for a month, times 100. Now, if your answer is 15 or less, you're golden. You're doing good. You could be doing this podcast instead of us, so that's not a problem. If you're between 15 and 20, that's creeping up on the borderline, and that's when you want to start to really pay close attention to what you're using your debt for. That's when you want to take that piece of paper and start writing stuff down for a month to see where you're spending on the fly. If you're greater than 20, you probably already know it, because you probably already feel some stress over it, and that's when you want to start making a plan to start paying things down.
That's such a fabulous, again, tangible exercise that teammates can go through. I have a quick question just to follow up. You said subtract housing, but earlier you mentioned that cars and student loans could also be considered fixed. Would we continue to keep those in this debt to income ratio, or would we subtract those out as well?
Okay, so that's a very good question, Jennifer. I leave cars in, and the reason I do that is because it can be so tempting, especially when you're younger, to buy a car that maybe doesn't really make sense for your budget. Some people, especially, you know, cars are something that they really like, they're into them, and it's, you know, kind of exciting. You go out in the parking lot and you get a little thrill, like, oh, there's my car. So we have to control that. You know, sometimes it's okay to have a very reliable used car if it makes sense for your budget at the time, knowing that as you're able to own more than you owe, there will be a time when you can choose that really nice car that you've always wanted. So I include cars just to keep us in control. Student loan debt is a whole separate thing. I do count that because, you know, you do want to get it paid off, but again, normally the interest rates are pretty low and it's not considered a really bad debt.
Okay, cool, thank you.
So we've got our debt to income ratio. We talked about some other pieces of the budget, or understanding our current state. with the fixed expenses and having a list of the variable expenses. Are there any other things that people should be considering, or where, if people have this information, teammates have kind of put all this on paper, where should they start when they're ready to actually put a budget together?
Okay, so I always say you need to choose the way to do your budget that's going to make you want to continue to do it. So Seth, for example, you mentioned putting everything on a spreadsheet. Well, I know people who like to do that. They're into it. They don't mind sitting down once a week and plugging things into their spreadsheet. I know other people who would never do that. So for them, that's not a good way to start. If you're someone who uses your phone for everything, you may want to find an app, and I'll tell you some more apps, good ones to look for. But you may want to do it on an app because you know that fits your attention span, that you're going to get into the habit of using it, and that you'll be able to keep it up. And in the end, that's all that matters, is you've got to find a way that you're going to actually do it. The most important thing as you go into this is having the proper mindset. So do not look at a budget as a way to keep you from spending or having fun. It's not. It's a way to allow yourself to do the things that you want to do. You just plan for it instead of spending as the money comes in.
Can I have you repeat that one more time? Because I think that's actually pretty powerful. Because I know even sometimes in my own experience, like we've bought and sold houses and stuff, and I would make a budget just to see like where we are, and it kind of in a negative way, like how much can we afford? But say that whole thing again, that's powerful.
Right. You have to go into it with the mindset that this is a tool that allows me to do the things that I want to do. So it's not a way to restrict yourself. It's not that you can never spend money again. It's that I'm going to make a priority to pay for the things that I have to pay for, to keep my debt under control, and then to allow myself to have that extra money to go on a trip or to shop. I mean, I do this for a living, but I like to shop just as much as the next woman. And so what I do is I say, okay, I haven't been to TJ Maxx lately. I'm going to go there, but I can only spend $25 because that's what's in my budget. And kind of like you were saying, Jennifer, I don't want to have that buyer's remorse. So if something there is more than $25, it's not meant to be. It's not for me. Yeah, it's not for me that day. So, allow yourself, use this as a tool to allow yourself to do the things that are fun to you so that you'll still be motivated to, control your money.
And what you're not saying, but what makes me think about if it's your $25 budgeted and that's not in the cards that day, then the next question that pops up is, what about your savings, right? So if you go and there's a shirt or something that's 35, well, if your budget's 25, then you need to save and try to get to that 35, right? I mean, that's super simple math, but that's where that saving and that pause and that moment of, do I really need this right now comes into, right?
Right, exactly. And, your budget can be tweaked. It's not cast in stone. So say I make that my goal, and then every time I allow myself to go shopping, I can't afford anything. I need to come home and adjust. I need to make my spending 35 instead of 25 and come up with, like I said, eating out less that week, finding where there's give and take that's going to work for my lifestyle so that I'm happy with my budget.
What a great point. Another aspect of the budget too is, what about the emergency funds? Because if I'm out shopping at TJ Maxx and I see that $50 shirt and I know I've only got 25, there might be a bit of a, hey, I've got this extra savings I've set aside, if you've got it, and that you want to start putting towards it. What about emergency funds? How do they play into the budget?
Emergency funds are huge. They are honestly the foundation of financial success. And emergency funds are just cash that you keep on hand in case something comes up, life throws you a curveball, you go outside and you have a flat tire, or you go downstairs and the fridge isn't working. You can just pay for it. You don't have to stress. You don't have to borrow money. You don't have to go to Lowe's and get a credit card to fix whatever problem you have. Now, I have some feelings about the general rules about emergency funds. So if you hear, people like your Dave Ramsey's or Susie Warman's talk about emergency funds, they're always going to say the same thing. And that is that you should have 3 to 6 months of your living expenses sitting in cash, just in the bank, to cover all those crazy things that come up. So 3 months is for a married couple. And the thinking there is that if, God forbid, somebody gets sick or loses a job, the other person can still bring money in. So 3 months is probably enough. If you're a single person, you're going to need more. So 6 months would probably be, more along the lines of what you want to target. But that's a lot of money. It's going to take a long time to build that much up in an emergency fund. So here's how I say you do it. You start with $1,000. Just get yourself to the point where you've got a good $1,000 in there. Because if you think about it, your basic things that go wrong, like my washing machine stopped working last week, $1,000 was plenty to get that fixed, right? So $1,000 goes a long way. Get yourself there, and then as you can add to it, $20 here, $5 there, and I really mean $5, that's good. Keep adding to it until you get to a level where you are comfortable, because you are the only person who knows your situation. And by that, I mean, think about what is important to you. What really constitutes an emergency in your life? So for example, I'm single, I don't have children, but I have a dog that I love more than anything in the world. And if he had to go to the vet, that would be an emergency to me. So I need to always have enough money to take him to the vet if something happens to him. We have to have our cars. We can't get to work without our cars. So having a reliable car would be an emergency to me if I couldn't drive to work. So take those rough guidelines and then think about, how do they apply to me? What are the real things that could go wrong in my life? And what are the things that are most important that I'd be able to pay for? Then build your emergency fund.
That requires a lot of zooming out and really sitting down and thinking about where you are, and then what things impact your life in regards to some of your more deliberate strategies, in the day-to-day.
Right.
Very
And
personal.
So you have to remember that there's lots of things that you'll hear the financial gurus talk about, but it can all be tweaked to fit your specific situation. Use it as a guide.
And I think it's important too, Cynthia, that you said $5 here, $3 here, $5 here, because when we talk about here at the Well, we talk a lot, right? We talk about health and exercise, nutrition. We want to talk about financial health because it's extremely important. But all of it comes down to the behavior. And sometimes what we see across all of those spectrums is this belief in the all or none principle, right? I got to have $1,000 in my pocket to put into the bank, or else it's not considered savings.
Right.
As opposed to the small building blocks, the process to get your house right, and it takes time, and there's a lot of variability with people.
Yep. And that's life, and we can't beat ourselves up when that happens. It's just, tomorrow's a new day, and I get paid on Friday, and I'm going to put $5 away.
It's inevitable.
Counts.
Right?
Yep.
And it's inevitable, right? Like we decide we're going to start a weight loss program, start a running program, start saving, and then life just happens. Something happens to feel like we can get derailed. But it sounds like having that grace and flexibility helps us to still make our goals and be successful even when things aren't going as we originally thought.
Exactly. And I'm sure you guys talk about setting reasonable goals, and I say the same thing with the budget. A budget has to be reasonable. If it's too strict, it's going to be hard, and you're not going to be motivated to continue.
So speaking of goals, Cynthia, if we've got an idea of the grand scheme of where I guess what we look like on paper, and I say that probably in the wrong context, but like what our finances look like in and out, how should we be setting up our budget? So for example, we've got the fixed debt, we've got the variables. How much of our take-home pay should be targeted for different expenses, whether it's housing, food, transportation? Is there like a magic percentage that we really need to be living in?
Yep. So there are guidelines for that as well. And the biggest chunk of our money is normally going to go to housing. And knowing that housing around Charlotte is expensive, take this for what it's worth. But in general, we want to target about 35% of our budget to go to housing. And when I say housing, that's going to be your mortgage, your rent, your taxes, utilities, insurance, the big chunk. So I know we live in an expensive area and it may creep up a little bit there. Transportation, we want to try to keep that around 15%. So that's going to be your car payment, your insurance, you cover your gas and that. If you can set aside some extra to cover repairs, go ahead and benchmark that on your budget, throw a little bit in there so that won't creep up on you. Other living expenses would be things that are the more variable things like we talked about earlier, like vacations or entertainment, which, we can't really do a whole heck of a lot of right now, which might be a good thing. But when things get back to normal and we're able to go do things, entertainment will count, clothing, vacations. That all together should come to around 25% of our budget. That would leave 15% to go to debt, because if you guys remember earlier when I was talking about your debt to income ratio, we said that 15% was fine. So we want to leave 15% to pay down student loans or credit cards or anything you're trying to knock out. And that leaves 10 for savings. So 10 is a perfect target for savings, and that can be a combination of your 401k or your retirement savings and other savings. And the good thing about that is that the match money that we get from Atrium counts toward that 10%. So that's huge. So I'm not sure everybody listening remembers, but if you save 6% in the 401k, Atrium matches you 4%. So that's putting you pretty darn close right there.
Wow, and we'll get to spend a lot more time on the 401k this month, but that's a really good point. And the 10% seems like a really good threshold, even if you're working through a couple of different ways with your 401k, or you're doing it through the $5 every pay period to try and get yourself set up to be successful.
Right.
As a mom with 3 driving teenagers, the 15% for transportation sounds a little unattainable.
Okay.
When you said that, I was like, oh golly, it might be over.
Okay, remember when I talked about different points in life or different, so you're at a point in your life where this one's probably different for you.
Okay.
The good news is it'll pass. They'll get older. They'll start to take on more of that themselves eventually.
Well, if I'm reading the math here right and listening to Jen's story, so I've got 3 under 7 or under 8, and our variable for food is the highest point now. And instead of me getting really excited about that going down, I should just be prepared for the transportation to go up, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Yeah, so you'll flip-flop that one for sure.
Wow.
Yep.
So you mentioned some apps that we could use on our phones to kind of help us. Could you take a minute just to talk about the ones that you would recommend?
Yes, so there's tons of budgeting apps out there now, and you want to make sure that you're not choosing a version that costs anything, because there are so many that are free, and you really don't want to spend money to save money when you don't need to. So when you're searching, look for the free versions. Probably the most popular one that I have seen is Mint. I always meet people who love to use Mint, so look at that. There's one called Good Budget. There's one called Coin Keeper. There's one called Envelopes. It's Mvelopes. And that's kind of the way folks used to do it in the past, where you'd get paid and you'd take cash and you divide it up into different envelopes. So you would have a housing, a transportation, a food, clothing, whatever. You put the money in the envelope and you spend out of that envelope, and when it's gone, you stop. So,
oh my gosh, I remember that. That's how my father taught me. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah, so there's I'm not a huge fan of that. I think that's hardcore, but there's an app that works like that. Now, I'll tell you when I do like that, and that is for the holidays. So I use the envelope version when I have to target gifts for people. So I'll have my parents, siblings, whatever, friends in different envelopes. And that way I don't go to the store and be tempted to buy things for myself when I'm spending this amount of money for this person. So it can work in certain circumstances. One more I wanted to mention is Digit. I've used Digit myself, and it's not exactly a budgeting app, but it's a savings app. And what it does is it constantly moves dollars from your checking to your savings account. A lot of banks will do this for you too. So if your bank offers such a thing, it's usually free. Do that. It's good. It's an easy way to have money moving. You don't have to go in and make yourself do it. You don't even see it. And before you know it, you've got $100 that you could then just put in your emergency fund.
Yeah, that's what my bank does. I don't think they call it the Edge program or something, where if I spend whatever I spend, they round up to the dollar and put that rounded up portion into a separate account.
That's awesome. Yes, I highly recommend that. Yeah,
it's fun.
Definitely.
So tons of great apps out there. We have talked a lot of really in-depth tactics and ways that you can set a budget and managing savings and really just give yourself perspective on, hey, this is where I'm at, this is where I want to go, and you've provided some tools for how to do it. I think the apps are great. Because there's so much information, Cynthia, is there a website, or are there other websites that we can advise teammates to check out that might have some good information they can trust?
Yes, absolutely. That they can trust is the key phrase there, because there are tons of sites out there that you don't want to mess with. So you want to look for .org or .gov sites, because these are going to be legit. Probably one of the best ones that I've seen is consumerfinance.gov. That's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they're going to give you really good information, especially if you feel like you're in a pinch, you're in a bad situation, and you want to understand how to get out of it. Don't just Google that. Go to a legitimate site. So consumerfinance.gov is good. There's one, you've probably seen the commercials about Feed the Pig. It's the American Institute of CPAs. That one is good. It's feedthepig.org. Annual credit report. We didn't talk about this very much, but this is really important. We can all check our credit report annually for free. The site that you go to do that is annualcreditreport.com. Don't go to other ones. Those aren't the legit free versions. So annual credit report. And then I use bankrate.com for all kinds of things. There are calculators and tools on that site that you can log into and use, and they're all legitimate.
What great tangible advice. I have to say, for this subject, I have found this to be so informative and enjoyable, honestly. Like, I think that our teammates could walk away with a list of great things to get them started.
I sure hope so. You know, it's like we said in the beginning, if you break it down into manageable chunks, it's really not that bad.
Now, we're going to post links, and we're going to try and put this non-mathematical formula that you gave us
okay.
On the sites too, so people have access to it. We've got a ton of good resources here at Atrium Health too. Are there any that you might want to plug, or maybe highlight for teammates to get to resources that can better help them understand their situation and set goals that are realistic and attainable for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So you always want to go through People Connect to get to the site for our financial wellness resources. There are all kinds of things out there, webinars on demand that folks can listen to. We try to keep that content fresh. And then we also have a Yammer, the My Retirement Yammer, or Your Retirement.
Right.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. You know, one thing that we always do here at the Well was, after we wrap up an interview, especially one is just dense and well discussed as this, if you had to give one piece of advice for teammates, what would it be regarding budgeting in this topic?
Don't be afraid of it. Just, you know, things can seem so overwhelming and scary until you just decide to take control. And once you sit down and you look at where you actually stand, I think you'll realize, you know what, it's not that bad. And now I know some steps that I can take to start making myself feel better about things. So instead of just letting it build and being worried about it and not doing anything, go ahead and face it, look at it, see where you stand. If you're not where you want to be, know that you're not alone, and there are tons of resources for you out there to help.
What can I say about that interview? So much good information. I have so many notes that I took just from talking to her. I can't wait to put into practice some of the things she suggested.
You know, as we're always fortunate with our guests here at The Well, Cyndi hits the mark. She's super knowledgeable, enthusiastic, and very passionate about what she does. I think that comes across, and I think she delivered a knockout message that hopefully we can put some notes forth so people can really take this away.
Exactly. I love her passion. She just oozes passion and compassion for this topic.
Great conversation. We covered a lot today. There's a lot happening all across the system, but Jennifer, there's also a lot happening with Live Well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
There is. The thing we have coming up quickly is our spring thaw. So we are doing that virtual race series that we started back in December with our Frosty 5K. In April, we're going to be doing the spring thaw. It's a 5K, 8K walk and run. The registration is open and you can find it on the Total Health portal. Seth, the first 200 teammates to register will get our awesome race t-shirt.
Now that is a way to live well. So really excited about that event. Now, Jen, again, pretty dense topic, very important. So what exactly did we learn today?
The key takeaway to budgeting: own more than you owe. Cyndi talked about debt. There's good debt, things like a house, car, student loans, etc., or there's bad debt. And I loved how she talked about bad debt is anything that doesn't add value, such as credit cards. Cyndi also broke down how to calculate your monthly debt to income ratio, which we will make sure we put that information in the notes for people to take away.
Yeah, really just control your money. Don't let it control you. Finding little ways to do that on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, looking a year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, 55 years out. Really great conversation.
Our next podcast will be airing April 15th, and we will continue our conversation with Cyndi, but this time she's going to teach us all about savings. We are capitalizing on this financial health month, Seth.
And teammates, don't forget to visit the Live Well website for more info on financial well-being, managing stress, working with a Live Well health coach, and access to a variety of other Live Well health and well-being resources.
Our resources are listed at the end of the show, and we'll add links to the programs discussed today in the comments on our Streams channel.
Looking for more things Live Well? Not following our Streams channel yet? Search The Well on Streams in Office 365 or find us on the Live Well website to access all our content.
Thanks for listening to The Well today.
Stay safe
and live well.